Welcome to Nurses Uncorked, where I pour out the unfiltered truth about healthcare life. I'm your host, Nurse Erica, serving up real talk straight from the front lines to your ears. Each episode, I'm uncorking conversations that matter to nurses everywhere, from the hilarious to the heartbreaking, the inspiring to the infuriating. No filters, just authentic nursing experience shared with a splash of humor and a dose of honesty. So grab your favorite beverage, put your feet up, I know they're tired, and join me as we uncork another episode of Healthcare Reality. Now let's get this shift started. Hello, and welcome to Nurses Uncorked. I'm your host, Nurse Erica, back with another informative and exciting episode for you guys because I do all the research so you don't have to. And I keep you up to date. All right. We are going to be covering some big cases that have been on previous episodes of the podcast. Okay. Probably two of the biggest cases covered on previous episodes. One is going to be the decapitated infant. Remember that in 2023 in Georgia? The mom had shoulder dystocia during labor. That. And the Lucy Letby case, the notorious serial killer NICU nurse in England. There are huge updates in both of those cases. And I've gone down all of the rabbit holes. I've done all the research for you guys, and I'm going to bring you up to date on everything. But first, there are some housekeeping items. So I just want to thank everyone first and foremost for downloading this episode. If you haven't done so already, please leave a review, rate, and share with friends. It really does go a long way in helping the podcast out. And I want to give a huge shout out to the newest patron of the podcast, Christy. Welcome, Christy. Thank you so much for your support. And a reminder to those that may not know, becoming a patron of the podcast comes with all sorts of perks. In addition to helping the podcast and elevate everything to the level that you guys deserve, you get episodes early. There are patron-only Zoom parties. In fact, there's one coming up that I'm super looking forward to. If patrons are listening, please check your email for more information on that. There's giveaways. You can sometimes pick the drink of the week, the cocktail of the week. If you want more information, there's a link in the description of the podcast. But speaking of cocktails of the week, my favorite part, because I need this every week. And I can't believe I've never done this one before because I feel like it's such a common drink. I'm making a white wine spritzer, you guys, right? Doesn't that sound like perfect for summer, you know? But also, I just need to do something with all these bottles of Chardonnay that I have in my house. I need to use those up. So basically it's 3 parts white wine. You can use any type of white wine. I have Chardonnay, and it's 1 part of club soda and some lime juice. So in my wine glass here, I already have the ice and I've poured the wine in here already, the 3 parts wine. And I've got my Canada Dry club soda. There we go. Popping that open. Pouring it in here, 1 part to 3 parts wine. And then you're supposed to take a lime wedge and squeeze all the juice from a lime wedge in. I don't have any actual limes, but I have a whole bottle of 100% lime juice. So I'm just going to squeeze some in there that I think equals about that much juice. You can also garnish with a lime wedge. I'm going to mix this up, take a sip. I'll let you guys know what I think. That is good. That is actually so refreshing. You know, I'm in the desert in the summertime and it's over 100 degrees today. So this is nice. Also, the room where I record is like right in the middle of my house. My house is not big, but for some reason it has 2 separate air conditioning units, 1 on each side. And it's one floor. It's not even 2 floors. I don't know why there's 2. But in any case, this room, my office, I feel like they just missed it. Like it's neither one of the air conditioning units is attached to this room because it gets hot in here. And then with all the lights and everything. So anything to help cool me down like this lovely white wine spritzer is a yes. I love that. All right. If you guys have any suggestions, by the way, for cocktails of the week, drinks of the week in upcoming episodes, please let me know because I am always looking for recommendations. All right. I think that we will do the infant one. Well, they're both kind of infant ones. The decapitated infant one first. This one comes with a bit of a trigger warning because, of course, it involves, well, actually, they both do. Now that I say that, involve infant death. So if that is something that is triggering for you, then this may not be the episode for you, and that's totally fine. All right, let's get into it. You may recall from previous episodes, and I'm going to let you know it's episode 6, episode 33, and episode 44. This was covered extensively in previous episodes, so you can go back and listen to those if you would like. But I'll give you a little recap to bring you up to date. So this was July 2023. Southern Regional Medical Center in Georgia. There was a mom in labor, young mom. I want to say she was maybe 19 years old. She'd been in labor for quite some time, had been pushing for hours and was not progressing. She had what is known as shoulder dystocia, where the shoulder of the infant is caught, and that was explained in detail in one of the previous episodes. She had allegedly at one point asked for a C-section and they denied it. There was lots of manual maneuvers attempted, excessive traction, allegedly. Not sure if that was forceps or vacuum or both, or just pulling, manual pulling. But in any case, they could not remove the fetus vaginally. It just wasn't going to happen. And so eventually they did rush and do a C-section. And in the process of opening mom up, they discovered that the infant's head was severed from the body, which is absolutely insane and unimaginable. I've never heard of this happening any other time. I don't know if anyone else has. I think this is just one of those exceedingly rare cases, and who knows. But it just gets worse from there because they never disclosed it to the parents. Now, they obviously told the parents that the infant had passed, but they never told them about the severed head, which is absolutely insane. And now they can argue, well, that would have been traumatizing to them. And sure, absolutely it would have been. But not as traumatizing as what ultimately ended up happening. They wrapped the baby's body, propped it up on something, like leaning against something elevated, propped the head on top of the body so that it looked kind of normal. And of course, it's, all wrapped, all the way up through the neck in a blanket. So, you probably couldn't tell. And they allowed the parents to view the infant through a window, which is weird already, right? I'm surprised they didn't push to hold the infant. Maybe they did, and we don't know. But they never got to hold the infant. They only viewed it through a window. And so they did, in fact, not know that the head was severed. And it was not until some days later when the funeral home called to discuss arrangements for the funeral and that they figured out or were informed of the decapitation. And, I assume it was kind of accidentally disclosed. I am sure the funeral home was under the impression the parents knew, because why wouldn't they have known? But can you imagine how traumatizing that conversation must have been? I mean, you've already lost your baby. You've just, gone through a traumatic labor. You have to now go through a funeral, and then you're told that? There are no words. And you may recall that there are 6 nurses named in the lawsuit against the hospital. And to this day, there is no details on that, other than at the time, the attorney did say that these nurses failed to advocate or intervene. And so they're named in this lawsuit. And I have just been really wanting to know more details about that. But Everyone is tight-lipped. Nothing has come out. And, who knows if it will. If they don't go to trial, if they were to settle out of court, then we may never know what the nurse's involvement or lack thereof may have been, but I'm very curious about that part of it specifically. In any case, there are 3 lawsuits on this one case. One is against the hospital. One is against the OBGYN because she was not an employee of the hospital directly. They are like contracted employees, And then the third lawsuit, which has to do with the update today, is against the private pathologist that the parents hired to perform an autopsy. They paid him $2,500 to perform an autopsy because the hospital refused to perform an autopsy. And I wonder why they refused, Well, a couple of days after his autopsy, this is Dr. Jackson Gates. He posted the autopsy photos and video to his personal Instagram. Quote, for educational purposes only. Obviously, there was no consent from the parents. And, it's not hard to identify whose baby this might have been because how many decapitated babies do you know, right? Well, he went on over the course of that month to post multiple videos to his Instagram in what they are saying is graphic and grisly detail of a post-mortem examination of the baby's decapitated, severed head and body. And at that time, his social media account showed a history of posting those type of photos and videos of previous autopsies that he had performed, which is crazy. I can't believe that like I say it's a nice day and I get a video banned. He's out there posting autopsies and no one is flagging his videos or account. I digress. Anyway, that account was taken down eventually. Now, he claimed that he had not violated HIPAA due to a supposed clause that allows physicians to inform the public when there are safety concerns in healthcare, which seems like a stretch, but I don't know. And he says it's not required for doctors to get consent to report a crime or some sort of health issue to the public. He said he's been doing this for 15 years, publishing my autopsy cases to explain to the public the victimization of those persons who have died. Again, seems like a little bit of a stretch in this case. Were you really trying to educate the public about a potential risk? Or were you trying to get views and followers? Because, well, that lawsuit, that one of the 3 lawsuits, finally went to court. And just a couple weeks ago, on June 20th, the jury found in the parents' behalf and awarded the parents $2.25 million, which includes $2 million in compensatory damages and an additional $250,000 in punitive damages against the pathologist who posted the video and the company that he worked for, Medical Diagnostic Choices in Atlanta, Georgia. Well, the parents had sued him back in September of 2023 for alleged invasions of privacy and fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Yeah, you think? Emotional distress. They had originally asked in the lawsuit for $3 million in compensatory damages and $25 million in punitive damages. They were not awarded that, but they were awarded $2.25 million, which is still huge, right? Their attorney has said, while we are pleased that a jury punished Dr. Jackson Gates for his reprehensible behavior, nothing can ease the pain that the parents, Jessica Ross and Travion Isaiah Taylor Sr., have experienced in losing their baby boy in such a horrific way. In a Facebook post that has since been deleted, Dr. Gates said the outcome of the case was a complete miscarriage of justice and that he intended to file an appeal. The other 2 lawsuits against the hospital and the OBGYN are still pending. And of course, I will continue to follow this case closely and give you guys updates as they are available. That is just, I'm happy for the parents that they have some sort of justice, It's the first case of 3, the first suit. So I feel like that's a good sign for them. I am appalled that the pathologist is doubling down, it would appear, and insisting he did nothing. Like, you can't see? Or maybe this was just a teeny tiny lapse in judgment, Doc? Unbelievable. And they paid him. They paid him. And he did that, Terrible. Well, on to the next case. Are you guys ready for this? This is a big one. Lucy Letby. Now, this one was discussed in great detail in episodes 9 and 44 of the podcast, if you want to go back and listen to those episodes. But I will give you a little recap to kind of refresh your memory. So Lucy Letby was a NICU nurse in England, who is now known as one of the worst child serial killers of all time. In 2023, she was convicted after a 9-month trial and 22 days of jury deliberation. She was convicted of murdering 7 NICU infants and the attempted murder of 7 others at Countess of Chester Hospital in England. This was in 2015 to 2016. The mechanisms by which she was accused of inflicting harm were overfeeding the neonates, air embolism, like purposely pushing air, smothering, and insulin. She is serving 15 whole life sentences. You may recall that at the time, the authorities searched her home. They found her diary and several Post-it notes that said some rather concerning things that included, I killed them on purpose because I wasn't good enough to care for them. I am evil. I don't deserve to live. I am a horrible person. No one will ever understand this, among others. Now, I think that those were like separate things she had written on separate notes, not all cohesive in one place. And I don't think that they ever specified the babies or, but that is, of course, the assumption that people are making. She was arrested 3 times between 2018 and 2020, but allowed to return to work. She was not actually charged until 2020 and has been in custody since that time. At one point, she was removed from bedside as part of the investigation. They kind of manipulated her to, if I remember correctly, to remove her from bedside to, it's like she would go on vacation and the deaths would stop and then she'd come back and they would start. So they were trying to, I think, test that theory. But the point is, the hospital knew, right, that something was going on, that she had been arrested. They knew about the deaths. They were part of the decision making or coordination to remove her from bedside and then put her back. You know what I mean? They clearly had awareness of what was, being accused or investigated, right? Well, she's maintained her innocence all along, and we will get to that because I actually have a couple different updates for you in this case. But here's the really exciting one. 3 former managers from Countess of Chester Hospital, where Letby worked, have just been arrested. This is the former chief executive, the former ex-medical director, and the former director of nursing. They are all facing charges of gross negligence manslaughter, willful misconduct in public office, and corporate manslaughter charges. There has been a long investigation all this time into management's failures throughout this process, including allegedly ignoring repeated warnings from nurses and doctors about Letby's behavior and failing to act on those concerns repeatedly. The arrests are part of a broader police investigation into the hospital's response to the increased levels of infant fatalities in its neonatal unit. There were reports that the hospital attempted to silence the doctors that came forward with their concerns, and rather than investigating the claims, they insisted that the doctors write apology letters to Lucy. They even brought in 2 consultants to mediate and facilitate conversations between them. Can you believe that? So doctors are coming forward saying, hey, these deaths are only occurring when she's here. We think maybe something might be going on. And instead of the hospital investigating, they're like, yeah, you need to apologize to her. I mean, I wish I was shocked, because that is the most hospital management thing ever, right? But it's still absolutely insane. There's been some conflicting evidence and mutterings throughout this entire investigation. Currently, those 3 former managers are out on bail, and their charges do not affect the conviction of Lucy. But let's talk for a minute about the precedent-setting component of this, because I cannot think of a single other example of management in a healthcare facility being held accountable for their part in something. If you guys know of any examples, please reach out, let me know. But I cannot think of any. I mean, what comes to mind is the Charles Cullen case. We recently, a couple episodes ago, had Amy on, the good nurse, talking about that and how egregiously the hospitals knew that he was murdering patients and never did anything about it, never reported him. In fact, they tried to obstruct investigations, withhold evidence. The risk manager was particularly heinous, and they would just let him continue killing patients, or maybe eventually fire him and let him go to another hospital where he continued to do it. And this happened again and again and again. They were never, to this day, never held accountable. I also think of the Redon DeVot case. I mean, we all know, regardless of how you feel about that case, I think everybody is in agreement that Vanderbilt held some liability there, right? They certainly did a lot to prevent having safety measures in place. And then when it was discovered, they did not report things as is legally required. They lied, they covered things up, repeated over and over and over again. To this day, no one at Vanderbilt has ever been held accountable, right? I can't think of, like I said, a single example where management has been. And so this is very, very exciting in my perception. Even though it's in England, I hope and pray that healthcare admin here in this country are learning about this and going, oh shit, if it can happen there, it could happen here. Because I'm telling you, the only thing that might stop these horrific, greedy, awful administrators is the fear of criminal prosecution, of possibly having to go to prison. That might be the only thing to force them to do the right thing against their will. Because God knows nothing else does, right? Because they have no conscience. So I think that this is really exciting. This is hopefully a turning point, hopefully, where we see more management held accountable. Even if they are not the ones that directly inflicted the injury, how often do we know that they were aware of it, or that they did things knowing that the likely outcome would be harm to a patient? And almost always it's to save a buck or make a buck, right? That's it. They knowingly, willingly, happily, aggressively put patients in harm's way every single day to make a profit. And they do the same thing to nurses and their license and their livelihood, all for the almighty dollar. They are morally absolutely corrupt. These are horrible, horrible people. So the thought of them finally being held accountable for their part in any of these type of incidents, hell yes. 1,000,000 times, hell yes. I cannot tell you how happy that makes me. So there are also some crazy updates in Lucy's criminal case, separate from these 3 managers. Now, as I said, she has maintained her innocence all along, from day one and to this day. And she has a ton of support. People that believe she is absolutely innocent. Since the conviction, there have been a lot of dramatic claims and appeal actions and public outcry for further investigation. She has already lost 2 appeals, mind you, okay? But her legal team insists that medical evidence was not presented at trial. And how? How was it not? You had 9 months. And, I don't know how the legal system works in the UK, but I'm sure that there were, hearings or things raised and they were not granted the ability to present certain things or whatever. But you had 9 months. What do you mean it wasn't presented? So, in February of this year, 2025, an independent 14-member panel of internationally renowned medical experts, led by a Canadian neonatologist named Dr. Lee, they did a whole independent investigation. And they came forward and claimed that there was no evidence that any of these babies were murdered. And they presented these findings in London, stating that all of the infant deaths and injuries were due to natural causes or poor medical care rather than deliberate harm. They claimed that they found alternative explanations for each and every one of the deaths and injuries. Now, it's interesting because that same Dr. Lee who led that investigation, it was his previous research from an academic research paper way back in 1989 that was used in the trial against Lucy Letby. And so this Dr. Lee has accused the prosecution of misinterpreting his prior research, which studied air embolism in newborns. He said that they used it to support claims that Letby injected air into babies' veins. However, Dr. Lee stated that his research only studied air embolisms in arteries, not veins, and that the distinct skin discoloration referenced in the study would not have occurred with venous air embolus. There is also a chair lady justice there by the name of Thirlwall, and she is expected to release an official report on the deaths early next year in 2026, which is months later than it was originally planned. But this is either, like I said, one of the most prolific serial killers of all time, or the greatest miscarriage of justice ever. I think it's important to note that there really were no witnesses ever to her doing these things. And there's no video of it or anything along those lines. And, these are fragile neonates at varying ages of gestation. And, they're fragile. Some of them are going to not make it. That's just a fact. Some of them are going to suffer complications. That's a fact. And there are a lot of people out there saying there's actually no proof that insulin was pushed. There is actually no proof of this and that. And like I said, she has a lot of supporters out there that are demanding a new trial. And I don't know that that's something that can even happen in their legal system there. But the authorities are still investigating, going back all the way to 2012. Any other patients that she had that died while she was there. This is at 2 different hospitals, I believe. So from 2012 to 2016, because they investigated already from 2016 to 18, right? But now they're going back to like the beginning of her career. So it's possible that she may face even more charges and maybe even another trial in the future, which, I mean, I'm not sure what the point would be because she already has 15 whole life sentences. But, and then what happens if those that think that she's absolutely not guilty, what if she has another trial for new charges on other patients from the past? And then she's found guilty in that trial. How would that impact that, and their current thought on everything? I mean, it's fascinating. Like it's truly a fascinating case. And I feel like this is one that we're just never going to hear the end of. It's going to be going around years from now. I think, kind of the same way that like the John Benet Ramsey case, how many years, decades later, it still is. There's a new lead. I kind of feel like this might be that. There's so much information in this case that it's I can't even imagine how challenging it must have been to prosecute, and all the medical evidence, being presented to a non-medical jury. There is a podcast, and I don't recall the name of it, but I will find it and link it in the description of this episode. And I've talked about it before in some videos. There were 2 reporters in England who did a brilliant podcast throughout the entire 9-month trial and after, where they were there in the courtroom and they posted everything like as it was happening, the same week of everything they would update. And so it gets very nuanced into all of the details, and they did an outstanding job reporting it. So I will try to find that and link it in the description, but it's a lot. It's hours and hours and hours. But if you're interested in it, like I am, that's really a good one to go to. But what do you guys think? I always want to know, like, reach out. Let me know what you guys think of this case and the other one, because my gosh, right? There's just so much to each of these. And these are the ones that we're going to hear about forever. They're going to go down in history and infamy rather. So I'm curious what you guys think about it. But this week, instead of an enema award, I am going to award the elusive, the rarely seen Golden Stethoscope Award, which is a good award, right? I think there's only been 2 previously. So this is always very exciting. But before I get into who is getting that, let me remind you that the Enema of the Week Award is brought to you, as always, by Happy Bum Co., a leader in at-home enema solutions. Now, you guys know that the gut microbiome has, all the research coming out the last few years has been absolutely fascinating. There's a lot of people out there that their gut microbiome was just, it's a mess, right? Whether they were someone that have been on multiple rounds of antibiotics, maybe as a kid, or they just don't eat a wide variety of different types of foods, which, causes you to not have a diverse microbiome, or maybe they've had repeated cases of C. diff or an undiagnosed H. pylori, or, anything like that can lead to just an overall dysbiosis of the gut microbiome, right? An imbalance. And it can exacerbate inflammation and all manner of GI issues, right? There's a lot of people that suffer with these issues. But Happy Bum Co. has been touted by many to be the ultimate biohacking, detox, and wellness tool. So if it's something you are curious about, something you've been thinking about, you should definitely go check it out at happybumco.com. You can use code Nurses Uncorked for 15% off your first bundle.
Now for your enema of the week.
And without further ado, this week's, I'm so happy to do this, Golden Stethoscope Award goes to none other than the constable in Cheshire County in England who arrested the 3 senior managers who worked at the Countess of Chester Hospital where Lucy Letby worked. Specifically, Detective Superintendent Paul Hughes of Cheshire is the lead investigator. And so I want to thank you, Detective Hughes, for doing something unprecedented and holding managers in healthcare accountable. This is so exciting, and I thank you for your service. So this week's Golden Stethoscope Award goes to him, and well deserved, well deserved. Well, I have a couple exciting guests coming up soon that are scheduled. I'm excited to share with you guys. Not yet, but soon. And I have been doing so much research lately on all of these different updates and stories out there. I just feel like that's kind of overtaken my life the last couple of weeks, is researching. Well, you should see the pages and pages of research that I have. So more to come. But also, you guys let me know if there is something specific that you would like me to research, to look into, to talk about. Reach out. Let me know. I'm always open to suggestions. If you have a guest that you know of that you think might be a good fit for the podcast, let me know. And let me know what you think about my new background. Did anybody notice I got rid of the bricks, the green brick tiles? And it's still green, the same kind of green, but it's a flat green paint. So there's no reflection anymore. I was getting reflection and glare off of that. So I had to get rid of it, which hurt. It hurt because I worked so hard on that. But I think this is much better because now I'm not getting the glare. So let me know what you think. I'm still working on my office. I've got a different plan for the opposite wall that's like a totally different look that I'm going to be doing down the line. But in any case, until next time on the next Nurses Uncorked.